Hello, welcome to this video. Cal here from my living room, about to talk to you about an album that is gone down in history as quite infamous. Whether that's for the right or wrong reasons, I'm not too sure, but I'm going to discuss this today with you, and that is the one that's behind me here, which is Lou Reed's Metal Machine Music, which came out in 1975. There he is on the back there. Okay. I do not have I don't know if this originally came in a gatefold, but it's actually just the single sleeve with the two records in there. But let's talk about this a little bit. So, Lou Reed, famous solo artist, most well known from his affiliation with the Velvet Underground, the infamous indie band that spawned many other bands. They were considered the band that created so many other acts, as was their influence in music in the 20th century. He then creates sort of an indie vocabulary of sorts with this band, and is the archetype for, I guess, your intellectual hipster kind of act, and that would sort of become the blueprint for that, and possibly a laughing stock for people who don't like that sort of aesthetic. But nonetheless, he was with that group. Prior to that, he was a songwriter and wrote commercial jingles and things like that. So he had really good songwriting chops leading up to his Velvet Underground days. Eventually, he leaves the Velvet Underground to undertake a solo career, and he starts with a record contract with RCA and releases a self-titled album to not a lot of fanfare, but as is back in the days was the thing at the time, record companies would generally give you 2 or 3 releases to try and make albums that would sell. They didn't seem to be as ruthless as they probably are now. And again, now it's just a different dynamic and different business model altogether. But back then, artists were signed to 3 or 4 record contract deals, and they would have to uphold those contracts, the record company and the artist. And as a result of that, what you would get is contractual obligation releases, which people would put out, which I'll touch on in a little bit. I'll just park that there. But anyway, he was able to continue on RCA, and he got David Bowie in to produce his follow-up, Transformer. Now, Transformer had a fair amount of hits, like Walk on the Wild Side and Perfect Day, and Satellite of Love, which are, FM rock staples now. And he had a great amount of success off the back of Transformer. And so he continued on throughout the 70s to be a solo artist. And in that time, especially the 70s, he was quite a polarizing figure. He's often seen as contrarian. He used to be very, very ambiguous in answering questions from journalists. They would quite often be quite a troll to them. So it would be to RCA's complete bewilderment when he offered up an album that was completely instrumental. And not only was it instrumental, it was actually a double album of instrumental tracks. And this is where we come in with Metal Machine Music. Now, he does talk about some of this stuff here actually on the jacket of the album. And I'm going to read it because I think that it's quite significant. Because it starts with a spec sheet. It doesn't actually start with... Well, this is a great example of it, but it doesn't actually have track names. It has a bunch of specifications. Okay, and, you know, Sony half tape, UA quarter tape, Pioneer quarter track, 5 piggyback Marshall tube amps in series, Arbiter distorter, Jimmy's, not sure if that means Jimi Hendrix's or not, Marantz preamps, Marantz amps, Altec Voice of America monitor speakers, Sennheiser headphones, drone cognizance and harmonic possibilities vis-a-vis Lamont Young's Dream Music, rock orientation melodically disguised, i.e. drag, avoidance of any type of atonality, Electro Voice hi-hat filter microphones, Fender tremolo unit, Sun tremolo unit, rig modulator, Fender dual Showman bass amp with reverb unit, pre-Columbia white, no synthesizers, no ARP, no instruments. And then he says a bunch of stuff like decibel ranges, 20 Hz to 30,000 Hz, distortion 0.02 bass and triple ceilings, strict stereo separation, no panning, no phasing, no... And then he has a little bit of a diagram in here. Now, why have I gone at pains to actually tell you all of this on this video? Well, the reason why is because this was seen as a statement against popular music. And whether or not you like this album or what's contained on this album at all, actually doesn't really matter. What Lou Reed was able to do with this is, I'm not going to say single-handedly, but he was a big part of creating modern avant-garde music. Now, he name-checks Lamont Young in here, and Lamont Young's Dream Music, which is a modern classical avant-garde music that he's talking about here. And what you basically have is about 80 minutes worth of drone sounds. There's no lyrics, there's no composition, there's no melody, there's no harmony. What you've got is music reduced to the sum of its parts in a spec sheet. And so after this, he would make Conan Island Baby, which is the complete opposite of Metal Machine Music. It was actually probably one of his more accessible albums. And the jury is also out as to whether he did this to get out of his RCA contract. Because after this, I believe he went to Arista, and then he did albums like Street Hassle, which is one of his best tracks. The album, not so much, but it's beside the point on whether you think this is good or not. This is something that he had to do at the time, I think. And there's a lot of stuff that comes from this. This is a highly influential album, even if it isn't, entirely musical. Or I would actually argue that it is pretty musical. But in the conventional sense it isn't, but in the spiritual sense I think it is. I think it's quite an interesting concept. And it does say it on the front here. It says an electronic instrumental composition. So again, it's also Lou Reed really tongue-in-cheek. It's saying, if you return this album in 1975, which reportedly a lot of people did because they thought it was faulty, you just had to read that to get an idea. Well, there's no songs in here. There's no vocals. He's not singing anything. He's not singing, Berlin or Perfect Day. That's not happening here. What's happening here is a sonic experimentation that he undertook, and whether or not he was sincere or not is maybe beside the point. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, have you listened to this? What do you think? I don't think this is something that you can critique. I think this is beyond critique in a way. Or maybe it isn't. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's a contradiction. Maybe a musical contradiction. So let us know what you think. Metal Machine Music, Lou Reed, and I'll see you in the next one.